Hello, Santa Fe, and welcome to Living Santa Fe at La Fonda, and Ed Pulsifer, who is the Director of Sales.
Thank you, Carlene.
And today we're going to have a big show.
We are, but first, before I introduce our speaker today, just give a quick mention. 2022 is our centennial year. The original La Fonda opened December 30th, 1922. We have a lot of activities and a lot of fun things going on this year, which one is a centennial lecture series. We have some incredible speakers throughout the year. In March, during Women's History Month, on March 25th, it's from 2 to 4 in the New Mexico room, we have Jenny Kimball, our CEO and one of our owners, Barbara Felix, architect and designer of all of our projects, Meredith Schweitzer, Katrina Parks. It's going to be an incredible presentation. And then in May, we have on May 13th, The History of John Galmin by Dr. Audra Belmore, who's the curator of the John Galmin exhibit at the University of New Mexico. And then there's just different lectures throughout the year. You can find these on our website, www.lafondasantafe.com. And I would like to introduce the gentleman that did our first lecture series on Friday, February 25th, on his new book, Santa Fe's Fonda, The Inn at the End of the Old Trail. So it was an incredible presentation, and those of you that could not make it, you're going to get to hear Dr. Alan Steele talk about his new book. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Alan Steele.
Okay, Santa Fe, we're back with Living Santa Fe, and I want to thank Ed Pulsifer from Director of Sales, who's been very helpful to our TV station. We've done many shows here at La Fonda, so we have them as one of our chief sponsors. And thank you, Ed, and all your staff. They've done a beautiful job for us. Now today, Santa Fe, we have an unusual man here. His name is Mark R. What does the R stand for, or do you want to answer me?
R is for Richard.
Alan Richard Steele.
Yes.
He has written a book called Santa Fe's Fonda, the story of the old inn at the end of the trail. And it ties in real well with our pictures here today. We have some from the one from 1922, and we have some from 1930s. There's the old Fiesta, 1930s Fiesta, and two of the Harvey girls later on, with the map that is right now in the Santa Fe room. And it shows the trail, Santa Fe Trail, and it's an old map and it's beautiful.
Yes.
So anyhow, Alan, I read this book. I loved it.
Wonderful.
I thought I knew everything there was to know about Santa Fe. Some of the things I know, well, you would not put in the book. It's a very interesting book. It goes way back. And I'm going to ask you a few questions about it, and I'm going to tune in on some of the characters you've got in this book. It's just really well done. First of all, let me ask you, where can they get this book if anyone's interested?
This book is available through the publisher, and that's the History Press in Charleston,
Okay.
South Carolina. It's also in local shops, and it's also available on Amazon. So
Okay, that's wonderful. And they probably have it here at the
absolutely.
La Fonda.
Yes, in the Detour shop.
Mm-hmm. So I would advise anybody that's watching this show, whether you were born in Santa Fe, and especially if you're a newcomer, because a lot of people coming into Santa Fe, they don't get it. This book will help you get it, because it has some wonderful history in it. The last 2 centuries of the history of this hotel that I'm sitting in right now, and the opening of the Santa Fe Trail. All of this started in the 1820s, and at that time, Santa Fe was a nothing. And you had adventurers, you had trappers, you had people coming in from Missouri along the Santa Fe Trail, and it opened up the Southwest to trade.
Yeah, literally.
And where did you get your information? You must have done a lot of research.
Well, there are many stories in the book, and it was a matter of searching out those stories that had to do definitively with the hotel that was here, the old inn, which started out being called the United States House, then it was called the United States Hotel, and then it became the Exchange Hotel,
Right.
which was a popular name for hotels in those days. And then it leads right up into the time that this very building was built.
Now, one of the things you've done in your book, you start off each chapter with a little something from Matt Field.
Yes.
Now, Matt Field had been on the Santa Fe Trail and had written these things. It's very poetic. Tell
Very.
me a little bit about him.
He describes the Southwest so beautifully. And of course, he got into many exciting adventures,
Yes.
as everybody did, who came across on the old Santa Fe Trail. And he had a very lovely gift with prose and poetry. And so it's very evocative. And I said, this is what we need to really set the stage for each of the chapters. And so it worked out very nicely to have his quotes from his writings at the beginning of each chapter. It really sets the stage.
It's very descriptive. He'll describe a house. He'll describe the roadways, and it's beautifully done. Now, at that time, this is before Santa Fe New Mexico became a state. We had been under four governments: Spanish, Mexican, Popey, the Indians, and then the American government. So our state differs a little bit than most states because we were actually under four governments. So a lot of these people coming in, I mean, these guys here didn't want them coming in.
That's right.
One of the stories I want to talk about that caught my attention was the cousin of Cynthia Parker came in here, wrote some information on Cynthia Parker, and for people that don't know who Cynthia Parker is, she was kidnapped by the Comanches, and she married the chief. Her son was Juana Parker, who was one of the greatest Comanche warriors ever.
Yes.
And she lived with them, and her parents or her family tried to get her back, but she didn't want to come back.
Yes, her mother never did come back.
Uh-huh. That's right.
So-
Now, she was just one of the people that came in here. That there were others that had been kidnapped. Many of the women were taken captive. And then a lot of the Mexicans came in and helped the tourists get in, the travelers, I should say. Tell me about the Donahoe family, Mary Donahoe.
Donahos. The Donahos, very interesting family. They basically were the first United States citizens who came out and actually ran the early hotel. And they were from the East. Their families had moved to Missouri. And then the men in the family wanted to make some money out here in Santa Fe because they heard the marketing and the trading was quite exuberant in those days. And Santa Fe became the center of trading and sales, a commercial center between Mexico and the United States, as well as New Mexico. So that family was a wonderful family, and we discovered that several women who had been captured by the Comanches down in southern Texas, after they had roamed around with that Comanche tribe through Texas, they eventually came up to Santa Fe, and I expect it was part of the trading that was going on between the Pecos, you know where Pecos is,
Yes.
and the Indians from that area. And she was still a captive when she was here, and she was rescued by some Mexican merchants who had been sent by William Donahoe, the husband of the lady who was running the first hotel here. So it's quite an exciting story.
What a life.
Yes, indeed.
Another character you mentioned in here that I found of interest that a lot of people here in Santa Fe recognized the name was Don Armijo, Manuel Armijo. He was the governor, and his mistress, I believe, was La Doña Tulas, who ran a gambling house, who was the best known woman about town.
Yes, she was the Grand Madame
Yes.
of Santa Fe.
She was the gambler.
Yes, she ran the Monte Bank
That's right.
on Palace Avenue. And she loved the old hotel. She loved to come here and enjoy the social life and also the attractions that the hotel had. So, yes, she figures large in the story as well.
She also had the biggest funeral ever held in Santa Fe because she was in like Flynn with the Archbishop.
Yes, yes. It was a very colorful life, shall we say.
Now, Stephen Watts Kearney came in I believe it was around 1846.
1846, yes.
And he was the first American to come in here and establish it.
Yes, he came out with his army called the Army of the West. And the idea was to take over the territory for the United States. He was able to do that without any opposition when he came to Santa Fe because the U.S. had sent people over to try to convince Governor Armijo that this would be a good thing and that he shouldn't object to the Americans coming. So they took it very peacefully, took the city very peacefully, and of course then went on out to California to claim
right.
California.
Now, all the action happened on the plaza. What was the plaza like? Give me an idea of what your thoughts were about the plaza, where all these people came
Yeah.
together with their goods.
Yes, it's where everything happened. You know, when the wagons with their merchants came into town, of course they had to go through the customs there in a customs house, which actually was just across from the La Fonda here. And then as soon as a wagon train arrived, and many of them were very large, I mean, there were thousands of wagons that came out during the time of the old Santa Fe Trail. And when they did come, it was a huge occasion in Santa Fe. And the wagon masters would make as big of a show as they could as they came into town. And then there was party all night long and on to the next few days. So that was the biggest thing that was happening in the town in those days. And the plaza, just as it is today, is really the center of town. You know, I tell people this wasn't made by Disney. This is authentic.
This is the real deal.
This is the real deal. And so all the social occasions took place there, as did, we aren't there yet, but as did the final days of the old hotel.
That's right. Now, the Exchange Hotel was not a beautiful place. What did it look like? I know you have pictures of it in here. It looks just like an old house. And there was a man by the name of Ortiz who was considered Mr. Hospitality in Santa Fe. Look, tell us a little bit about him.
Yes, he was a wonderful person as far as I could tell all around. And when these merchants came out, they needed a place to stay. They also needed a place to display their merchandise, the goods they brought to sell. And so he would rent them rooms or a house if they needed it. He and his family owned a number of houses on this very site. And those houses eventually got put together and turned out to be the first hotel. It wasn't a large hotel. It only had 10 or 12 rooms, but it had large areas for social gatherings. And so much like today, many social events take place here in this hotel. In those days, this was the place also, you know, so presidents and generals and others were entertained in this hotel because it had, and I understand the actual courtyard of the hotel had large cages with mockingbirds in them that were singing all the time. It must have been a very restful and wonderful place in those days.
Colorful.
Colorful, yeah.
Well, even today, you know, the visitors that arrive here, of course, this is a destination. I think we're like fourth in the world for visitors.
Yes.
We get a lot of visitors here. And They come here to enjoy the history of Santa Fe, the architecture for Santa
Yes.
Fe, the culture. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't know this history.
And the food.
And the food, absolutely, the food. So, yeah, it's great here. This is one of the best places. I remember it was the first club sandwich I had was here at La Fonda in 1946. I was just a little girl. I was so impressed. It was at the Plazuela at that time, was different than it is today.
Great memories. Santa Fe makes great memories.
Oh,
For everyone
absolutely.
who comes.
Now, the Hotel Exchange became no longer the place. So they raised that in 1919 with a tank,
Yes.
an Army tank from World War
One.
I. Tell me about that tank.
That was a great occasion, and unfortunately, we don't have many photographs of that.
Uh-huh.
We
We've got one in here.
Only one we could find,
Yeah.
and it's not that easy to see. But they had a huge event in the plaza, and it was a Army bonds sale. And anyone who would buy a $100 bond, war bond, would have the privilege of either riding in this old tank or at least watching it tear down part of the wall of the old hotel. Mm-hmm. And by that time, the hotel was quite dilapidated. It had deteriorated so much that the city was threatening to have proceedings to have it torn down. So this was a very innovative way to take care of destroying the old hotel and clearing it for this building that we're in today.
And what happened to the old tank? What did they do with it?
That I do not know. It's not written down anywhere I could find, but I'm sure there are remains of it somewhere around in Santa Fe today.
Do you remember the name of it?
Yes, it was called the Mud Puppy.
The Mud Puppy.
The Mud Puppy.
Well, that's a good name for a tank. Especially, it was probably in the Argonne in World War I.
Yes, yeah, brought over.
Interesting, yeah. Now, okay, that started work on the old part of the current hotel. And the architect on that was Rapp, and Henderson, and that group had been in Trinidad, and they did a lot of building up in Trinidad, Colorado.
Yes, they did, and they also did some in New Mexico. My understanding from what I researched was this idea of the Santa Fe style really was first noticed at a warehouse up on Raton Pass. And they thought that really looked quite attractive. And so they transferred it here. This was one of the later buildings that the Rapp, Isaac Rapp was the main architect. And so it was, it just brought in the whole, what we call the Santa Fe style today, which, as you know, is a mix of different things, but mainly from the Pueblo Indians.
Yeah, now they had they started the Vigas. They had blocks. It wasn't adobe, it was blocks that were made at the state penitentiary, which would have been out there behind where the highway department is today.
Yes.
The old penitentiary.
Yes, this whole building was built with those bricks. And we used to be, I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there was a spot in the lobby where we could open a door and look in there and see the bare bricks that were
really?
used.
I haven't seen that.
And they're quite interesting, but well made. They
Yeah,
did a good job.
They were cement, I guess.
They were fired bricks, and I really don't know where they got the materials, but they were strong. This is a very strong building.
It is, it is.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump around because I keep thinking of all these things I saw. Another person that you want to keep in mind in the early years was traveling with William Becknell and Thomas James. Now, I understand Becknell was the historian and James had a lot to do with the development of these hostelries.
Yes, James, Becknell's first trip out in 1821 was quite a quick trip. He came out and quickly sold most of his merchandise. He came out because he was facing bankruptcy, and they were about to take him to bankruptcy court when his creditors were threatening him. And so he had headed out, and so he was a quick visit on that first time. Then James came, Thomas James. He arrived just 2 weeks after Becknell, and he stayed for a few months. And his story is very interesting because Mexico had just become independent.
That's right.
And they wanted to have a big celebration in February of 1822, and they had never had a celebration like this before. You know, it had been Spanish for a couple hundred years and never had an Independence Day, and they really didn't know what to do. So they consulted this merchant, James from Missouri, and he told them how he thought it should be. And he said, the main thing you have to do is have a flag that you raise up, you know.
Yeah.
And they said, well, we don't have a flag. He said, well, an eagle flag would be very nice. But they said, no. In the end, they said, no, we're going to have two hands shaking to show friendship to Mexico. And so he was very instrumental in the Independence Day celebrations that were held.
Yeah.
Then he was, after about 4 or 5 months, he was ready to go back to St. Louis, where he had a store. And he traveled back. He said he never wanted to come back again. However, I understand he did make a couple more trips. So, very interesting characters.
Well, Becknell was escorted in by a guy by the name of Don Pedro Ignacio Gallego. Not Gallegos.
Okay, Gallego.
Now, do you know where that, he was using the actual name as the way it was back then?
Very good, yes. And he met them as they were coming in just south of what is now Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Okay.
So it was that area where they met. And we can't tell this story without mentioning Chief Cardero. Chief Cardero, James, as he was traveling out, was stopped by a Comanche group out on the plains, and it was quite a disturbing encounter for him. In the end, he felt like he may be done in by that tribe. And then all of a sudden, a Mexican military unit came galloping up, and they said, wait, don't harm him, don't harm him. And it was Chief Cardero who had notified the military that there were some merchants here in trouble, and he was afraid they might not make it, so he notified the military, and they came out to rescue them and then escorted them into the area here.
One of the things I found interesting on that little story is Governor was Melgares at that time, and he welcomed him. So this chief evidently had some good political connections. But they went down through Barrio de Analco, San Miguel Chapel.
Yes.
They forded the river, which
Right.
there was probably a lot of water in that river at that time. And that was in 1821.
Yes.
So what a trip. Wow.
What a trip is true. I don't know if any of us could do that today.
I don't think so. We want it easy today. Another person in history was Zebulon Pike. Came through here in 1806. He was a representative with the United States territory. I did not know that.
Yes, he was sent to try to figure out where the boundary was between the Mexico territory and the Louisiana territory that the U.S. had just purchased from Napoleon. And things were not clear at all in those days where the boundaries were. And he ended up camping along a river which he thought was the Red River, but it actually was the Rio Grande.
Rio Grande.
And that's where the Mexican military caught him and took him down to Santa Fe to have an interview with Governor Melgares. Then he was sent down to Chihuahua City to be interviewed by the representatives there. Eventually, he was permitted to come back to the United States, and I think that was definitely because he was representing the government, and so he was escorted back to Louisiana.
Another one of the miscreants that came through here was stage driver Wild Bill Hickok. So he was with the Overland Stage.
Yes.
And he was a rough character.
He was a character. He was very good with a gun. Mm-hmm. And he was able to fend off many robbers who would have robbed the stagecoach. Yeah. Of course, he would drive the stagecoach as fast as he could, as well as he had good aim with his rifle. But his big thing was when he was coming into Santa Fe, let the horses have their head and go as fast as they could. They'd hit the Santa Fe River in a big splash and then come into the dirt roads of Santa Fe in a big cloud of smoke and come to the front of the hotel in a big, a huge display.
Well, he was a display man.
Yeah, and then the passengers had to stagger out of it must have been an incredible trip.
Interesting. On the more religious side, after talking about all these characters who came in here, there was Jean-Baptiste Lamé, who was made Bishop of Santa Fe, Archbishop, by Pope Pius IX. And that was in 1850.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
he was a character.
Indeed,
Powerful.
indeed. It took him a long time to get out here. He took a rather circuitous route down to New Orleans and then over the Texas coast. And then the ship they were on was trying to get over a little sandbar at Matagordo Bay, and it fell apart and sank. So they had to go get to shore on lifeboats. And I understand while he was sitting on the beach, he saw his luggage floating in the waves, so he grabbed that. Then he got a donkey and cart and traveled 160 miles up to San Antonio, and there he got in with a military unit headed for Santa Fe. And he thought there might be a couple of people waiting to greet him, but lo and behold, the streets were lined with hundreds of people who knew he was coming, and he had a wonderful reception, came right down San Francisco Street in front of the La Fonda.
Yeah.
And it was a great welcome.
Well, City of the Holy Faith.
Yes, indeed.
And Sanctuary City.
That's it.
Yes. The other gentleman that you mentioned a lot, and I knew the story, but I didn't know the names, was a man by the name of Henry Hopkins Sibley, who was a Confederate Army general. He was a Southern loyalist. They came into Santa Fe thinking they could get New Mexico into the Confederacy. Well, that was like blowing smoke up your nose. But they did get involved, the Battle of Valverde, the Battle of Glorieta. So again, here we are in New Mexico, involved in a civil war.
Yes, and the hotel at that time was very much involved. They loved the old hotel, had a good bar, and it was a great place, to stay. And it was one of Henry Hopkins Sidley's favorite places.
Well, he was quite a drinker.
Quite a bit.
Yes.
And it seemed that seemed to be part of his downfall in the end. But he went on, after they wanted to court-martial him. I guess they did have a court-martial for him, but he was acquitted. He was a good friend of the president of the Confederacy. They knew each other well. They had been in Army school together.
Yes.
And so he was able to stay out of prison. And then when he finished his U.S. Army career, he didn't know what he was going to do. He was retired, and he took a job working over for the Egyptian government to organize their army. And that was a dismal failure. They finally kicked him out and sent him back. But the real shame in his life, as far as I'm concerned, was he was involved in developing an army tent that the U.S. Army purchased.
That's right.
They purchased about 45,000 of the Sibley Army tent. And he was to gain apiece for every one that was sold. But unfortunately, he joined the Confederate Army, and the U.S. Congress said anyone who was with the Confederates would not get the royalties on those tents. So he died a pauper in Virginia.
He did. Very poor man.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
Sad.
brings to mind, and you have a picture of that in here, Soldiers Monument, which just recently, it was dedicated to the Civil War troops and other wars, and was torn down in 2020 on Indigenous Day by a group of insurrectionists that weren't even from, or it might have been partly some people from Santa Fe. There was quite an upheaval over that, and still it's going on now. What do you think about that?
You know, I was so glad that I chose to include that picture in the book.
Yes.
And I did that before it was torn down. I made that decision. I said, this is really part of the big story about the hotel and about people who stayed here. So I said, I think I've really got to put that in. And then it was torn down in 2020.
That's right.
So I said, that was fortunate that I thought to put it in the book,
It was good
because
you
who
put
knows
it
if
in.
we'll see it again, you know.
The people that tore it down had no clue
No.
what it was all about.
No,
I know
that's
they
right.
didn't.
Yeah, that's just,
another
you know,
one of
it's,
our-
that brings up the point. So many people try to change history, but you can't.
No.
You can't change history, and it's best just to tell it as it is. That's my motto.
Nobody's perfect. This
Yeah.
country was not perfect. We've
Not
had
e-
a lot of things that happened, but you know, after Polk signed the Manifest Destiny, you go across the country, you take whatever you can.
Yes,
Not right,
yep,
but that's the way this country was developed.
yep, that's very true.
So I'm glad you put that picture in too.
Me
That-
too.
I mean, that's a treasure in Santa Fe.
It is.
Really is.
It was, yeah.
Okay, here's another character. 1823, Bartolome Baca. Now, he was a governor too.
Yes, he was. And he was the first governor to actually traverse the old Santa Fe Trail from the west to the east. Up until that point, it had all been merchants coming out from Missouri.
Yeah.
But he said, hey, why don't we do that ourselves? And so he actually started the New Mexico trade with Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't find the proof of this, but I believe he was the one who was a good friend to Pike when he was out here.
Zebulon Pike.
Yeah, Zebulon Pike. But anyway, yes, he was a very interesting person, and the merchants from Missouri were a little bit upset because he really raised the cost of bringing goods into Santa Fe. But he's another pioneer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, one of the most famous ones, Kit Carson, who was kind of an illiterate fellow when he was a kid, and managed to team up with Charlie Bent, and I did not know that he married Charlie Bent's sister, or they were
Sister-in-law.
brother-in-laws.
Yes, yes,
And
yes,
they
That-
were the defenders of commerce.
yes.
Now, they probably did
Yeah.
a lot of things, ruthless things too.
Kit Carson just zoomed so large in the history here. Just incredible. You know, going out with the Army to claim California.
Mm-hmm.
He was their guide, and of course he went through a very traumatic experience there because when the Army got out there, they were surrounded by the locals, the Californios,
Yeah.
and they were stuck. Kit Carson saved the day. He went barefoot through enemy lines in the middle of the night while all the militia, the Spanish militia out there were sleeping. And he hiked out to San Diego Bay to get help from a U.S. Navy ship that was there. The Navy came out and rescued the Army. So he's the hero of the Battle of San Pasqual.
Oh, that's right.
Among many other things, and the saddest part of his life was that General Carleton ordered him to remove the Navajo tribe from their homeland down to the south, a 300-mile trip.
The journey of death.
The
yeah.
journey. So that was and he was very upset about it. He tried to resign.
Did he not marry into the tribes? Or I know he had several wives.
Yes, I'm not sure of the exact, the exact culture of the lady he first married, but then later on he did marry Owl Woman's sister.
That's right.
And Owl Woman was the wife of Bent.
Yes.
And of course, Bent himself had a very terrible ending,
Yes.
as you'll find in the book.
Yes, yes, he did. He was not.
As governor.
Yep, he did. Another famous man, Lew Wallace, another governor from 1878 to 1881. And while he was sitting up here being a politician, he wrote a book, Ben-Hur. And the joke was, I asked somebody one day, I said, "What did you think about Ben-Hur?" He says, "I didn't like her, but I liked him."
Yes, that's quite a book. And the interesting thing is, he was writing about the Middle East, and he'd never been there.
Yeah.
He was just making it up. But after he was governor here, the president sent him over to be ambassador to the Sultan. And so he got to see all of the territory that he'd been writing about eventually. So there's so many quirks that make history so interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
It's great. The first presidential executive that came here and stayed with the Spiegelbergs was General Grant, President Grant, Ulysses S. Grant.
Yes, after he was president. And he stayed for a while, and then he was elected president of a mining company.
Yes.
And so they were very optimistic about getting some good returns from the mines, but actually they were becoming quite depleted. They'd been mined by the Native Americans who were looking for the turquoise especially, and then the Spanish continued the mining, and so anyway, he was here and was treated. They had a party for him here
at the Exchange.
At the Exchange Hotel.
Yeah, at the Exchange, and they came in with 4 white horses, and and he stayed with the Spiegelbergs.
Yes, yes. Mrs. Spielberg felt like the hotel was not up to the standards that she would like, so she made sure that he stayed with them.
Adolphe Bandelier. Now, anybody that's been to Bandelier, what an achievement that was.
Oh my, yes. And of course, he started his research out at Pecos, the Pecos village, and then moved to Cochiti and also Santo Domingo. Got into a little bit of trouble because he wanted to be part of a wedding ceremony that the lovely Native Americans didn't want him at. So they asked him to leave, so he moved. So all these incredible characters that you hear all about show up here in relation to this old hotel. It's amazing.
Yes, it was all surrounded around this place.
Yes.
Abraham Staub, Jewish, came in. His wife Julia had like 8 kids, which in those days, no wonder she's still a ghost over at La Posada. 8 children, and back in those days they didn't have gynecologists or anything. They just got women pregnant and they just had all these babies. And she died and he made money.
Yes, they were a very influential family in town. He was a great real estate person, owned a lot of property, and he owned the hotel.
And the hotel, yes,
yeah,
he did.
He had a partner at first, and eventually he owned it all on his own.
Yes.
And he went through several partners during the time. So he was an incredible person.
Yeah.
Incredible person. And she was a belle of the city as well. She loved entertaining, but eventually, with her postmortem problems, she went a little bit berserk, I guess. And are you going to bring up Sister Blandina Sigali?
Absolutely. She's my heroine.
All right.
Are you kidding? That's my next thing.
Mine too.
Sister Blandina, I read about 20 years. I got a hold of her journal. I read that darn thing and I said, how come nobody knows about Sister Blandina? And
Yes.
I interviewed, in fact, Doreen and I brought the fellow up from Albuquerque who runs St. Joe's. And we did an interview on the fastest nun in the West. Well, fast forward several years, just here a couple in July, I was invited to go to the Blandina Memorial thing up in Trinidad, Colorado.
Oh, wonderful.
Because now she is in for sainthood.
Yes, yes.
She's at the venerable stage.
Incredible. She's my hero, and also, and I've always called her Billy the Kid's best friend.
Yes.
Best friend. She was always concerned about him. She spoke about him quite often in her journal, and she went to visit him. She saw him 3 times. And each time it was quite an incredible encounter between the two. Mm-hmm. They were very respectful of each other, and she would just worry about him all the time, and went to visit him when he was in jail here in Santa Fe, and even helped him out with one of his friends was in jail with him. And Billy said, "Can you help this guy out? He's never been in trouble before." And she took him under her wing in a way, as best she could, mm-hmm. and helped him out. So, incredible person.
Oh, she was amazing. She was a very small woman, Italian.
Italian.
And, of course, up in Trinidad, everybody's an Italian or has Italian blood in them somewhere. But she started the schools, the hospitals here in Santa Fe. Sisters of Charity were very big in these Southwest.
And then she helped in Albuquerque.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Orphanages and everything. Yeah, she did a lot.
Incredible, incredible.
Okay, now we get to the big man, Fred Harvey.
Oh, yes. Yes, indeed. Fred Harvey had a son, and they were very busy with their facilities out here in the West. Eventually, though, they decided they wanted to have a hotel in Santa Fe. This is 1925. And he sent his son. His son had been in the U.S. Army, Air Corps, and he was hoping his son would take an interest in the company. And so they asked him to come, and they found this this hotel was not successful at first. It opened in 1922, because this is the centennial, mm-hmm. but it was not financially successful, and it actually closed for a year or two. Mm-hmm. And so it was sitting here. Here was this lovely hotel, and the young Harvey boy found it and said, "Yes, Dad, I think we should get it." And so that's how it actually became a Fred Harvey Hotel.
Yeah, and it opened in 1822, Christmas Day, or 1922, Christmas Day, right?
Day. Yes, they had a great Christmas opening.
Yeah.
That must have been a wonderful event.
Oh, God, don't you know it? Oh, my goodness, yeah. He stayed, and this is an interesting thing, too. He and his family stayed at the De Vargas when they were building. And I knew the former owners of the De Vargas Hotel, which is now St. Francis Hotel.
Yes, that was their favorite place to stay.
Uh-huh.
And I think they liked the atmosphere there. It's quite a palatial type hotel, which is beautiful.
Uh-huh.
And so they always stayed there. But they did eventually, the railroad company bought this hotel, and eventually they started staying here. But this also was not a very large hotel.
That's right.
So they had problems accommodating all the tourists who started coming out on the old Santa Fe Trail and Route 66.
Yeah. Now you gave some statistics on Harvey operated. They had 25 hotels. They had 40 sit-down restaurants. This goes across the United States. 54 lunchrooms, newsstands, gift shops in 80 cities in the United States, soda fountains, retail stores, Union stations in Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, Houston, Wichita, Galveston, and Fort Worth. I mean, and of course, the grand one, Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yes, yes, it was quite a large organization. You know, they were working the train tracks between Chicago and LA. So there's plenty of places to set up shop.
Yes.
And they took real advantage of it. They especially liked the Native American atmosphere and the trips out. They started the great detours, the tours from the hotel.
Yeah.
They liked this place so much because it did have a lot of natural beauty around that people could go visit.
Yeah.
So those were great adventures.
A lot of the Native American culture he brought
Yes.
into the American scene.
That's right. And yeah, so that was a great organization. And at the same time, we can't forget that the Hilton hotels started about the same time.
Yeah, Hilton was down in San Antonio.
Yeah, he was from San Antonio, New Mexico. And
He got married here.
he did. Zsa Gabor was his his wife that he married. And I was amazed that he did it here at the La Fonda. There must have been a good reason. I don't know.
Well, yeah, they had a lot of liquor.
Great place to do it.
Well, you can't forget the other people that have run this hotel. The last people that had it, what was their name?
Yes, I know who you mean.
You know who I'm talking about.
Yes.
It just gone right out of up into cyberspace. But a lot of people have run this hotel since.
Yes, yes. And it's so exciting that it's now run by the folks who are in charge. They just do such a wonderful job.
Yes.
And always very pleasant and anxious to help. And it's just an amazing hotel. It's just something very special for New Mexico and especially Santa Fe.
It's still the heart of Santa Fe.
It is. It's very much so. And so I dedicate my book to the past, present, and future employees and owners of this hotel.
That's great.
It's just wonderful getting to know them and to work with them.
And you are a tour guide here too, aren't you?
Yes, I do history walking tours in town, and I enjoy that a lot.
Well, I'd also like to mention Tom Gallegos, because he was the gentleman that was looking for you. He's
Yes.
also a tour guide
Yes,
here.
yes.
So another part of their hospitality.
Yes, we're thankful for that. The hotel permits us to do that here, and they even support us with package plans
Yeah.
in their advertising for the hotel. So
Yeah.
great experience, having a great time.
Well, Santa Fe has a lot of great people that were born here. They're from the old Spanish families. When Spain took over, this is the thing that so many new people coming into Santa Fe don't understand, this deep culture here and the love that's in Santa Fe with these families, and still is.
Yes, and I'm always amazed how well we do get along together here in the city with
Yep.
the different cultures. I think it's a good example for the rest of the country.
Well, until you know this history, you're not going to make it in this town. You come in here, oh, they got beautiful hills, they got beautiful that. They come in and immediately want to change it. Well, it's not going to happen.
That's right, that's right. Yes, the history is something we can't ignore,
That's right.
and it can be beautiful if you treat it the right way.
That's right.
So I'm very glad I was able to put this book together. And
Alan, Santa Fe, if you can, read this book. It's most interesting. We just touched on it,
Yes,
But
yes.
there's a lot of history in this book, and you will enjoy it thoroughly. And would you sign this for me?
Of course.
Of course.
Happy to do so.
Thank
My
you,
pleasure,
Alan.
my pleasure.
Thank you, sir. It's a
Wonderful
pleasure
to be
meeting
with you.
And thank you, Santa Fe, for tuning in.